Oh boy. Welcome back to the Mentor Roulette grind. This time I've mixed things up a bit. I am doing my roulettes mainly in the evening. You can follow the time based on server time in the top right. And I'm going as warrior once again. As I suggested last time, I indeed had more experiences of things going a bit more wrong, where the group might need saving or something out of the ordinary needed to be done, simply because I'm in the tank seat instead of healer seat. This time around, we again have a pretty hefty majority of 4-man duties. However, we do have some very interesting encounters this time around. In fact, this particular session of Mentor Roulette started with one where you could say it was actually a miracle that I happened to choose tank on this particular day. We started with Ramuh Extreme, which is a duty where you need both tanks to know what they're doing. Sure, the more players that are solid in the group, the better, but both tanks need to work together for this to work. If only that holds true, you can probably beat the boss, even with a lot of deaths. But the tanks need to work together and understand how to do that. Now, I have never done Ramuh Extreme synced before, so I started the duty by just admitting this and asked someone else to give the rundown. The other tank, Falafel here, gave the quick rundown and we were off to the races. To be clear, the vast majority of the mechanics on this fight are the same as on hard difficulty, it is just that they have been tuned up to be much more threatening. Let me give you a quick rundown. First, Ramuh will somewhat frequently smack the current main tank with a no-warning tank buster Shock Strike. This will kill them. If you pick up 3 Thunder Orbs around the arena, you gain a massive Thunder Resistance buff that now makes those tank busters just really hurt. It also means that anyone near the main tank will die if they stand next to them when these tank busters land. Now, if you pick up more than 3 orbs, it instead turns into static condensation, which, from what I could tell, should not give the thunder resistance, but instead makes you heal less. But, based on observations throughout the fight, it seems this still gives this thunder resistance, or rather resistance to shock strike. Because of this, the main tank cannot pick up more orbs to maintain the buff or something. They genuinely have to wait until the buff runs out, then pick up 3 new orbs. This leaves potentially several seconds where they are at the mercy of Ramuh and whether he decides to one-shot you in that small time frame. For this reason, the other tank is supposed to grab 3 orbs and tag in when the first tank's buff is running out. Alternatively, if the main tank messes up and grabs a 4th orb, the second tank also has to tag in. That is effectively what the tanks need to do in this fight. Simply alternate this one mechanic and be careful to not get too many orbs. For other mechanics, just like on hard, Ramuh will horrify a few players until they get struck by thunder from the blue circles. On top of this, whenever the blue circle thunder attacks land, they're immediately followed up with a donut AoE in all of the water, so overall you don't want to stand out there, unless you have to. Oh right, the ads are out there. Enjoy that, melee players. Finally, just like on hard, at some point in the fight, 2 players will get tethered together, and every time they perform any action other than moving, they take damage. To get rid of it, just like on hard, one of the players needs to pick up 3 orbs, which causes the effect to disappear from both players. The rest of the fight is effectively just a more tightly tuned version of the hard version, with higher damage and so on. Because of the way these mechanics work, this particular boss requires 2 solid tanks and preferably some solid healers, but beyond that it is really down to whether the tanks can do the tank swapping or not. Everything else is extra. In fact, you can still beat the fight even if every time players get horrified, you just let them die and then raise them again. It is even okay for the tanks to die, as you only need a tag in around every minute. As a result, we get this one down in the first try. Seriously though, take a look at the total chaos in this run, and despite all that chaos, we still did it, because just enough stayed alive at any one time to deal with whatever was coming up. For Duty 2, Antitower, I noticed that the healer was very keen on maintaining regen on me all the time. Now, besides this, they seemed to attack just fine and use their toolkit, although it seemed like they only wanted to use Presence of Mind on bosses, which is a bit wasteful, but a minor detail really. I will also say that had I been a less solid tank, the maintenance of regen may well have been necessary, so doing that as a default is honestly not bad. Not at all, in fact. The Dragoon also seemed to be a bit confused overall, but to be fair, they were a first timer, so this is perfectly understandable. They also used their cooldowns well. Now, in regards to boss-specific stuff, I was mildly annoyed that I was stuck as a frog for the full duration because the two people that did not get transformed ignored the frogs on the first boss. On the final boss, we also had some mild issues with the brace mechanic. You need to hit the boss from the correct side to not get retaliated. But we had no deaths and no wipes, so the run overall was excellent. For duty 3, we go to Bardam's Mettle. This duty starts with an extremely brutal mega pull, so I inspected the gear on the healer just to see if they might be capable of it. I see a relic weapon, so I trust they can take it, and we go for it. Over the course of the duty, it turns out the healer knows me, and we have a bit of a conversation about warriors. For those curious, my perspective on this matter is that Bloodwedding is a bit strong. Just a bit. And I would not be shocked if Dawn Trail happens to nerf it, at least in AoE contexts. Like, maybe make the first target heal for more, and then secondary targets heal you for significantly less. The alternative option is that the other tanks get buffed more to be more on par with it. The reason why it can be a problem that Warrior is this strong is that both experienced and new healers learn that some tanks, warriors, don't need help, or hardly do, while other tanks, especially Dark Knights for some reason, but could be any tank not a warrior, do, which can be very brutal for actually learning to play healer, because it feels so random when you're still busy focusing on your own toolkit. You might not actually realize that the reason this duty is so easy is because of the tank being a warrior, and that other duty was hard because either the tank was a different job or was just bad at warrior. I've even seen players reach the point where they get annoyed when they see the tank in a dungeon is not a warrior, because now they have to work harder, as if the tank chose to not be a warrior to spite them or something. On the other hand, I've also seen warriors complain in the same way about white mages because their holy casts reduce the damage they can gain with vengeance and weird stuff like that. I just don't think it is healthy to have one tank that is this much better than the other tanks at a particular aspect of the game, even if it is just casual content or whatever. Anyway, aside from this, the duty went with no issues at all. By the way, did you know that Warrior can solo Bardam's Mettle synced? For duty 4, we go to Hell's Lid with a first-timer healer. The Samurai also seem to have a hard time with some mechanics, but unfortunately, aside from explaining the mechanic when they can still try, like if we wipe, the best I can do is give them space to learn. The healer was, again, very defensive and wanted to maintain regen at all times. They would even cast things like Cure 2 on me if I needed healing. I offered them some advice at the end of the duty, which they appreciated, and I suggested to them that they might not need to be this careful, but that since they were a first time of that duty, it makes perfect sense to be extra careful, because you don't know if some particular attack is going to surprise you. Playing it safe on your first go makes perfect sense. I still gave them some tips about the fact that other jobs can heal too, and that they might tire themselves out if they try to do all the work themselves. Aside from this, the duty went perfectly fine with no major issues. And did you know that warriors can solo Hell's Lid synced? Yes, even with a DPS check at the end. For duty 5, we go to a duty that is rather spoilery, the level 90 dungeon of the leveling experience of Endwalker. If you don't want to see this, jump to this timestamp for the next duty afterwards. Now, the duty we went to was, of course, Dead Ends, which is known to be surprisingly tough, because the item level sync is tighter than most other duties at max level. A 30 item level difference between the minimum and maximum, where all the other duties are at least at a 40 item level difference. Now, for the actual run, it went just fine, although the Scholar had a very weird approach to healing. They would apply Excogitation to me, but they would also apply Adloquium to me while in combat, before excogitation ended, which is a very backwards approach. Tip for Scholar players. If excogitation is up, you can absolutely heal some extra if you want to, but don't use your GZD heals. Also, some warriors, me included, usually will allow myself to drop down to activate excogitation if it is convenient. Or, if unnecessary, will keep myself above 50% to make sure you are not feeling obligated to cast other healing on me. When you start casting Adloquium, in combat, while excogitation still lasts, you kinda break this contract. That contract that it looks like you throw at me when you use excogitation. Anyway, aside from this, the duty went fine with one hitch. On the second boss, the Scholar and the Dancer died, because they got hit by the lasers and then the spread markers. Well, did you know that Warrior can solo dead ends synced? Yes, really. So, I just kept the Samurai alive and we beat the boss. Also, a final little detail. Turned out the Dancer knew me, so a good day to you. For Duty 6, we went to Kugane Castle, and again, I felt like the healer was a bit extra careful. At this point, I'm starting to question whether I am being too demanding when I stamp any healer who regularly maintains a region or something as defensive or something. Maybe I should move my goalpost a bit back and instead appreciate healers that are going all out offensive, without anything going wrong of course, rather than complain about every single mildly defensive healer I come across. Honestly, I think what I'm really realizing is that I've been told that people that main a role or a job are much more likely to find it very aggravating to see other players do it quote-unquote wrong, and as you may have noticed, when I was healing in these duties, I was very lenient with the tanks, like extremely so in fact. Here, every time the healer does anything beyond the exact thing I want them to do, I notice. Am I actually a healer main? Anyway, sidetracking aside, this duty went just fine with nothing significant to point out. Oh, also, did you know that Warrior can solo Kugane Castle synced? For Duty 7, we do E6, Eden's Verse, Furor. I have done this duty a lot back in Shadowbringers, and I even beat it, and raid-led it on Savage. Football! A long time ago, so all the normal mechanics for the most part are very easy to remember for me. However, this boss, or these bosses perhaps, have a lot of mean mechanics. Like the blades that turn out to be cone AoEs, or the middle slash where you die if you step in the center, or Ifrit where if he hits you a second time with a specific type of mechanic, you get stunned for ages, usually leading to your immediate death. Unfortunately, during the Raksa-Paksa part of the fight, I got distracted when the blue circle knockback was coming up and I died. Fortunately, the fight was close to finishing up, so it wasn't even an issue that my co-tank forgot to provoke. For Duty 8, we go to Sirensong Sea. In this case, the healer seemed a bit more aggressive, which is a good thing, but sometimes they used Malikah too a bit randomly I felt. Aside from that, great. I also found it a bit funny on the Fleshless Captive that the Black Mage at first stood their ground when Dark was cast. I know I could interrupt it, but I wasn't sure if the stun immunity had ended yet, and I know I need my interrupt for the Seductive Scream a bit later, and the Dark being interruptible sort of feels like bait. As such, I never interrupt anything else on this particular mob. I do think it was an understandable move from the Black Mage. Beyond this, duty went just fine, and also, did you know that Warrior can solo Sirensong Sea synced? For Duty 9, we have the same Endwalker level 90 leveling story duty I mentioned earlier, again. If you don't want to see it, skip to this timestamp. With that said, we once again go to Dead Ends, with what appeared to be a full team of first-timers. This was really where I realized that I might actually be a Sage main deep down, because the things the Sage was not doing really aggravated me until I got it off my chest that they were making a bunch of mistakes. I did say it in a polite way of course, and mainly latched onto the fact they could attack way more. With that said, going with a rather basic approach so you have your extra cooldowns if you really need them when you don't know the duty isn't a terrible idea. The key here is that you need to be ready to use those extra cooldowns when they become necessary. So, because of this group being first-timers, we get to see a lot of things that may be interesting to talk about. Let me give my rundown of tips for some of these boss mechanics. For the first boss, wind in your back. It is far easier to dodge the AoEs if you're on the side with the wind in your back. Stay close to the boss. After the first time this mechanic is shown, a donut AoE happens just before, so be ready for that and then slide to the side. The cuff-up sort of chase AoEs are most easily avoided if all 4 players stack up closely and dodge in the same direction, as this minimizes the area of the AoEs. Besides, Craven Companionship comes immediately after, where you have to stand with one friend at least to avoid getting horrified. If you have a gap closer, you can actually dodge the donut AoE that comes after, if you use it really quickly, which I discovered while soloing this duty. Aside from this, the important part is that the main debuff of this fight is removed with Ishuna, and if it is not removed, you will die. This group's attempt at this boss would probably have looked a lot more bleak if it wasn't for the red mage being really good about using their Voraces. For the second boss, the main tip I can give is be careful standing next to others, as many mechanics are finished with spread markers. For the no future mechanic, take note that after the first use, the boss will add an extra line of circles somewhere, which means that sometimes your lane is just not safe and you have to dive for cover somewhere else. Also, in this group's attempt, they all got hit by the lasers into spread markers. Although, I will say 2 of them also had spread markers overlapping. Given they all died this early, and it was their first time, I felt bad about just doing the fight for them, so I asked if they wanted me to solo it, or wipe, so that we could go again. They encouraged me to solo it, and you saw the earlier part of this video, right? I've soloed this entire dungeon. For the final boss, the 2 really brutal mechanics, in my opinion, are Prance and Life's Breath combined with Loving Embrace, so let me focus on those. Yes, Warm Glow hurts like wow, but the main reason why this mechanic is so painful is because of the other mechanics leading up to it, so you may have less cooldowns left to deal with it. Prance has 2 configurations. Either Rala jumps in a square shape, in which case you go to the edge of circle 1, inside circle 4, and then start moving to safety once circle 1 explodes. Or it jumps in a Z shape, in which case you go to the edge of circle 1 and 2, inside circle 3, and once circle 1 detonates, you start moving to safety, being careful to not step inside circle 2 before it explodes. For Life's Breath into Loving Embrace, the butterflies resolve first, so simply stand safely for them and then move as needed for Loving Embrace afterwards. Remember, if you get the Doom mechanic, on this boss it is resolved by healing fully. I do think, on this boss, the Sage really came into their own and did super well, and I got the impression they used a lot more of their toolkit. I am still confused by the sheer quantity of Eucratian diagnosis they used on trash packs though. For duty 10, we went to Lapis Manalis, and both of the DPS players were amazing, and also mentors. They delivered mobs they aggroed to me, they weren't afraid of bursting hard during pulls, the summoner even used Rekindle on me. The healer though, was really weird. A lot of the duty, it looked like they stopped completely, as if they had to think over what to do next. Like they had to plan out their cards before they could do it. Overall, the duty still went fine, but that part was just really weird. For duty 11, we finished with Malikah as well, and it seemed the Dragoon was a first-timer. And again, the Scholar was weirdly aggressive sometimes with Adloquium, although less so than the other barrier healers I've had today. Aside from this, the duty went perfectly fine. And also, this was my 100th Mentor Roulette duty, so kinda nice to finish on a good one. Would have been cooler if this was the Ramuh Extreme run though, eh? And of course, just to finish properly, did you know that Warrior can solo Malikah's well synced? Of course you do, I mentioned it before. With that, I will probably be switching things up a bit more with what jobs I play in Mentor Roulette, as it turned out doing only one job made things get stale real quick. Getting different perspectives also helps me to be able to actually help from different perspectives, it turns out. One thing I do wonder about is if there is a specific time where extremes are the most likely to happen. I feel like every time I've had extremes pop up in my runs have been like within an hour from daily reset, whether it was before or after. What do you all think? When do you normally land in extremes when doing Mentor Roulette? Is it more likely with specific roles, specific times of day, week, or does it seem to be completely random? I would love to hear about that in the comments, because I am a bit curious to almost actually seek these out more. Now, that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you would like to support me and my channel more directly, you can become a member like these wonderful people here. You can also alternatively support me through Ko-Fi, link in the description. You can also support the channel by letting the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. Fun fact, from information shared with me, Ramuh Extreme is possibly the most common run killer in terms of Mentor Roulette, simply because of his requirement of 2 tanks working together well. Because you need 2 players of one specific role to play right and tank swaps are required, it is simply not possible to carry it all on your own, not even as a tank or a healer.